Welcome to Front Office Pros. As we all know now, the fantasy football season has come to a close, but it doesn't stop us from reviewing what transpired over the past year. And you may be panicking a little bit because you might have made some of the biggest IDP Dynasty mistakes in drafting these rookies that maybe you shouldn't have. Joe and I are going to talk to you about what you should do with them going forward.
Hike!
So heading into this conversation, Joe, I do think this is very important to talk about because we talked about this in our previous episode, talking about how do the NFL teams look at a certain position group. And honestly, it was reflective of the entire defense. So if you look at the 2024 draft, the first defensive player that was taken was UCLA's Leatu Latu. He was selected at the number 15 overall pick by the Indianapolis Colts. What's significant about that is it set a record for the latest defensive prospect had been taken in the first round of any specific draft. Before that, it was a number, I believe, 8 pick overall. So there's the first time that we did not see a defensive player draft in the top 10, which I do think is indicative of the defensive class as a whole. There weren't even that many first rounders to begin with. So this wasn't a strong class. But the first guy we're going to be talking about that was probably the top of your defensive players that were taken, and that's going to be defensive end Dallas Turner. Looking at consensus Dynasty IDP rankings, you're looking at the 103 or the third highest ranking defensive player. Edge rusher for the Minnesota Vikings. In our league, Joe, he ended up being the defensive end 101. He had 11 solo tackles, 8 assisted tackles, 3 sacks, an interception, and 7 hurries. So, he didn't really do all that well. Now, mind you, if you look at his snap counts, he was outsnapped quite a bit. Grenard was leading the team with 863 total snaps. Actually, Andrew Van Ginkel was one higher than him at 864. Patrick Jones at 459, and then Dallas Turner at 277. There were some. If you look at if you believe a big believer in PFF, his pass rush grade was quite low, and his pass rush win rate also, when you compare him to other rookies, especially guys like Jared Verse and what have you, did not do as well. And Joe, one of the things that we were concerned about with Turner, you and I talked about it early on, was his pass rush moves. We had talked about how we felt like he needed some diversification. He really relied heavy on that speed rush, which we saw in the combine, having a 4.46 40-yard dash. So what are your thoughts on Dallas Turner? He obviously was a huge disappointment. We are classifying him as a dynasty mistake for IDP. But, when you're at that juxtaposition, the question is, are you patient with the player, or are you going to cash in on that name value and try to get it whatever you can for the player? So where are you at with Dallas Turner?
Yeah, I would stay patient with him because I actually didn't have the lofty expectations that probably a lot of people did have with him because he's still a young player. He's only 21, so he came out younger than most of these other, edge rushers in this draft class. And I think that gives him the element of time to continue to work on his pass rush moves and continue to develop. But I get why the Minnesota Vikings did take him, because one thing you can't teach is speed. And he's got that, and he's got a ton of athleticism. And if they can, coach him up and teach him those other pass rush moves. And, he's got some good guys like Andrew Van Ginkel and Grenard to kind of learn from, which I think has also affected him in his, as far as his dynasty and IDP leagues. Just he's got those couple of guys ahead of him. And even, Patrick Jones is in a rotation there as well, as they like to just keep everybody fresh and keep everything moving. But I do think, like, in a couple of years, maybe Dallas Turner does turn into something, that athleticism, he's able to take that and get these improved pass rush moves, and become a better player. I know we've researched in some things. Some people compare him to like a Will Anderson type of prospect, and ironically enough, they were teammates. Pushed each other at Alabama to continue to do better. But as far as like some of these disappointments, I'm actually more concerned about Leatu Latu, a guy that I really liked a lot, because he was supposed to be a polished edge rusher, have all the pass rush moves, and yet he's only got 4 sacks. He's had way more opportunities than Dallas Turner, and he's not as young. So I'd be more concerned about Latu, and I'm being patient with Dallas Turner.
Wow, that's interesting. See, I can see it kind of in two lights. The first one being if Brian Flores continues to stay there, there's no question he is one of, if not the best defensive coordinator in the NFL. What he's able to do, I was concerned when you saw Danielle Hunter leave and go to the Houston Texans. It was kind of one of those things that's like, okay, what's going to happen? They had Zadarius Smith a while back ago with Danielle Hunter. They started over. They decided to get Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard. But what he's been able to do with those two guys has been incredible. So if he continues to stay there, I think he can develop Dallas Turner to be a really, really good edge rusher. My concern is, unless an injury happens, Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard have been so good. If you look at their contract situations, Andrew Van Ginkel is signed one more year. He's got the 2025 season, and then he's a free agent with a ton of void years at age 31. So he could very well move on. With Grenard, he's got a lot longer of a contract. Has a total of 4 years he signed with the Vikings. He'll have 3 years left. But the Vikings could opt out in 2026. He has a cap hit of $22.3 million. And if they were to cut him as a post-June 1st cut, you're talking about $19 million in savings. At that point, Grenard is, he's going to be getting up there in age. So my thought is if Dallas Turner is going to turn it on, we may start seeing flashes in year 2 and year 3 when he becomes a starter. That's when he'll really take off. But does he see the opportunities in the playing time? I'm a little mixed on it. I think if someone gave me, this is going to be a much better defensive class, and in our league, offense and defense are kind of an equal. We have a 16-team league. And, Dallas Turner was a late first for us in our league based on the way we do defensive scoring. If someone could give me, and again, different leagues, it makes it hard to kind of translate it to, but if I could get a second-round pick out of Dallas Turner, I think I probably would do it.
Interesting.
I just don't know how long it's going to materialize for him to actually. I think, the question will be, do you think that he will be able to learn all those pass rush moves and become a more polished player in practice time, or does he need game snaps? Because I don't see him getting many game snaps unless Van Ginkel or Grenard gets injured.
I think part of it is getting stronger too. And the longer you're in the NFL, you'll get stronger with the strength and conditioning programs and multiple more training camps. So I just think as he continues to progress, like I said, he's 21. Like a guy like Leatu Latu is already 23. So he's already got a couple of years ahead of him on him. So I just think given how young he is, like if he really puts the work in and continues to work on his craft, I think he definitely can get better. It might just take a couple of years, but sometimes it takes these defensive guys a couple of years to develop, and then you really have something. I mean, look, I drafted, Josh Allen for the Jaguars, and after I thought I had high hopes from him after his rookie year, kind of thought he was a bust. I kind of tossed him around and got rid of him. And then, a few years later, and now he's turned into one of the better edge rushers, to have for IDP leagues. So I do think in due time, like Dallas Turner could turn into something. That's why I would stay patient with him. And as far as, one thing with the whole draft thing, it also isn't normal for us to have 6 quarterbacks be able to get taken in the first round, which automatically pushes defensive guys. It's also a strong offensive line class, which a lot of teams put priority over as well. So I think those are some of the factors too that pushes these defensive guys down. But not to say that I don't agree with you that this isn't the best class, but as far as how late they go, it just kind of was a wild top of the draft with quarterbacks and offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that strong of a edge rusher class, though. You didn't have a Kayvon Thibodeau, Aiden Hutchinson, who was considered being, taken in the top 5 as prospects. I know you don't like Hutchinson. I know you don't like Thibodeau. I mean,
right.
But still, as a prospect, though, he was considered a top 5 pick. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So going over to our next player, That's going to be linebacker Junior Colson. In our league, Joe, he was linebacker 104. If you look at ADP, he was considered the 104, so the fourth highest defensive player ranked. And, he had a really disappointing season. Only played 200 snaps, had to contend with Deion Henley at 959 snaps, Denzel Perryman at 340, and then Troy Dye at 278. He ended up having 13 tackles, assisted 15 solo tackles over 10 games. That's all he had. But it was an injury-riddled season for him. People may forget early in the season he did have an appendectomy. I've had it. It's no fun. But his surgery sidelined him for the beginning of training camp, which definitely affected his preparation heading into the regular season. He then had a hamstring injury against the Panthers. He missed 2 games after that. Then he had an ankle injury against the Browns. Ended up missing 4 games, at least 4 games going on IR. So, he missed quite a few games. And I think you and I were both expecting him because of the familiarity with the defense, with Jesse Minter being the former defensive coordinator, with Harbaugh being the former head coach. I think we were expecting him to just kind of jump right in and be the guy because there was really an opportunity to be had because Eric Kendricks left in free agency, went to Minnesota. Or sorry, he was in Minnesota before, left and went to Dallas, I meant to say. So I know you're going to correct me there. So what are your thoughts on the former Michigan man, Joe? I know you were kind of mixed about him to begin with. Are you going to be patient? Should people be patient with him? Should they try to be able to get whatever they can for him at this point?
Yeah, I think he's probably another guy to just stay patient on because I don't really know what you're going to get for him. I know, especially in our league, a lot of league members don't really value linebackers. They think they come at a dime a dozen. So I still think he's got good potential. The fact that he's had all these different issues, I think has kind of stunted his growth. Yeah, I did think with the kind of the continuity, the fluidity, that he would have with Jesse Minter and Jim Harbaugh coming over from Michigan, I thought he would do a lot better. But he is only 22 as well. Maybe if he's got a full training camp next year, he polishes his game up and trusts his instincts a little more because I know that's kind of a knack on him as well. He tries to predict things that happen and causes them to not be as well in the run game. Maybe he cleans some of that stuff and gets better, next year.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern with him, I ultimately I agree. If you try to trade for him, I just don't know what you can get for him. So I think at this
I think
point,
that's the
your
tough
only
part.
option is to be patient with him because I don't know what you can get. But my biggest concern is honestly the emergence of Deion Henley. He still is on
Yeah.
his rookie deal. He has 2 years remaining, but in our league, Deion Henley was a top 10 linebacker, had 82 solo and 60 assisted tackles. So he had a really, really good season. I don't see him going anywhere for the next 2 years. I think he continued to perform at a high level. If that's the case, I don't know if there's a lot of room for tackles for Junior Colson. So unfortunately, unless an injury happens, I don't know what's going to happen for Junior Colson. So I was very high on him. I drafted him. I believe I even traded up for him in our league because of the familiarity with the defense. And the opportunity. LA was one of the best landing spots for linebackers because of the vacancy with the vacated tackles for Eric Kendricks leaving. But I don't know. He did not get off on the right foot, and I don't know if that opportunity is now passed him by.
Yeah, I mean it is a decent point, and another concern could be like he was mainly known for his prowess and ability to cover. So does that limit him to kind of become like a third down nickel type of pass situation linebacker? Because I know one of the other knocks is him not being able to come up in the run game and make those tackles and kind of get in those lanes and get the backs in the run game as well. So there are some concerns, but like I said, coming off of this. I don't know if like the hype in the draft situation was enough for anyone to offer you a significant amount of Junior Colson, because like you mentioned, like you spent probably decent draft capital to get this guy, and you're not going to get an offer that's going to supplant what you gave up.
No, No, unfortunately not. So last guy we're going to be talking about here is defensive tackle Byron Murphy II of the Seattle Seahawks. If you look at ADP, he was around the 107 or the seventh best defensive ranked player for this past rookie draft. In our league, Joe, again, not very good. Defensive tackle 89. He had to contend with a lot of snaps, though, with other interior defensive linemen. Mike McDonald really rotated a ton. Leonard Williams had 697, Jerron Reed 639, Byron Murphy 454, Roy Robertson Harris 378, and then Jonathan Atkins 366. Byron Murphy ended up having 12 solo tackles, 24 assisted, a half a sack, and 20 hurries over 13 games. And I think the big thing when it comes to Byron Murphy is heading into the draft, his frame of 6'1", 32, 3 8 arm length. He doesn't really fit that traditional mold of an NFL D tackle. So, how's he going to fare against larger offensive linemen because he doesn't have that ideal height? The big thing with him was his pass rush moves, which, we were both excited about. I think that was the reason why we rate him as high as he did, because of what he was able to show. Because if you can have interior pass rush and have that potential, that could really bode well for your dynasty value going forward. But now that there's more seasoned offensive linemen, he showed that he really didn't do all that well when you look at his pass rush win rate and pressure rate. That's kind of unfortunate. And then the other problem is his run defense. He's not really known for his run defense, so he's not going to have that high tackle floor that's going to help you. You really have to rely on the sacks. Obviously, you could have a combination of those. That's really what you need. So he has that ability to possibly get to the point of having a high pass rush and pressure rate. But overall, we haven't seen it yet. It is his rookie year, and defensive tackles take a long time to develop. So what are your thoughts on Byron Murphy, Joe? Should you be patient with him? Will you try to trade him? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think that last piece, like you said, is I think you got to be patient with them. I know as boring as that might be, because I'm saying be patient with all three of these players, but defensive tackles, especially, the history is it takes 3 years to, for these guys to develop into something. And, we've seen like the quarterback hurry stats have been there, and we know like the sticky stat is the sacks, and not every guy is able to get those big sack numbers. But I think if you're able to pressure the quarterback, be around them, sacks will eventually come. So that's part of the reason I'd be patient with him. And as far as his size, like they were saying the same thing about Kobe Turner. That was one of the knocks, was like his arm size. And all the scouts, like in the pre-draft process, were nervous about him and his ability to fill in for Aaron Donald because of his lack of prototypical size for a defensive tackle. And he's done just fine. But not every defensive tackle can also just come out and fire like a guy like Kobe Turner and be that dominant player. And honestly, it might come down to coaching there, because Brady and Fisk has come in there and also been performing as a rookie. He's also not the prototypical defensive tackle size that you'd want, and yet he's also performing and getting the sacks as well. So I think more good things could come for Byron Murphy. You just got to wait for it.
Yeah, I would definitely hold on him. If you don't typically see a defensive tackle break on the scene. Even a guy like Jalen Carter, who they talked about with a generational prospect, he isn't even, kind of, it's like fine wine when it comes to D tackles. They don't, kind of grow overnight. So, and if you look at it, Jerron Reed will be a free agent next year. He'll be 33 years old. Leonard Williams will have 2 years left on his deal, but his cap hit's $29.15 million. If they were to give him a post June 1st cut, they could save $20 million. I don't think they'll do that. Leonard Williams has had a really good season this year.
Yeah.
And honestly, it would be beneficial to have Byron Murphy next to Leonard Williams. It's not like Byron Murphy's going to be the only guy. They have, him, and they have some decent pass rush guys with Derek Hall and Boye Mafe. So that is really helpful for them. And even Uchenna Nwosu, who has been injured for a couple of games, so he hasn't been able to be there to really help. So he's got a decent cast around him. So I would not panic about Byron Murphy. Like you said, if you look at the hurries numbers, like we said, if you look at his pass rush win rate, his pressure rate, it's impressive what he was able to do in college. His hurries this year has been good at 20. He's only had a half a sack. So we'll see what he does next year, but I expect him to do better. So I'm not really concerned about him going forward.
Yeah, I mean, if those pressures and the hurry start turning into sacks, you're going to be very happy. And honestly, like, I'd rather have a guy that's got that pass rush upside and just needs to kind of work on getting those tackles and his play in the run game than have the opposite. Because at the defensive tackles, the difference maker is those guys being able to get sacks, especially if you got the big play scoring. Like our league rewards the more points for sacks. That, there's not many there's a lot of defensive tackles that are just space fillers. They'll get you a bunch of tackles, but they don't have that sack upside. So we always look for guys that have that sack upside, and Byron Murphy is just one of those guys, and we just know that it takes 3 years potentially for these guys to develop.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about a few players who ended up being the biggest IDP Dynasty mistakes, according to myself and Joe, as far as how they performed this past year. And I do think, as we want to remind you, we want to emphasize the need to identify, hey, these players right now, they're undervalued, and you can capitalize on those opportunities to improve your team. If we're talking about players who, if you have these players to hold them, but if there are owners who are worried about these guys, take advantage of it. They're undervalued right now. They did not perform as well. Go out and get them. For other owners who have them, we would encourage you to just, hey, have patience, right? There's a tension to manage between kind of having patience and deciding to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to get rid of this guy and make a calculated trade and be able to move forward. So thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.